Imagine what your fantasy football team could look like today if you had stashed high upside players instead of waiting every new week for the latest waiver wire pickup that you have to bid for. In today's video, we're talking about stashes, guys that you should pick up that have high upside in smaller leagues and larger leagues. There'll be something for everyone here. Before I get into my top 10, we'll talk about almost 20 names today. I just want to quickly talk about players that should already be rostered. That's because they're not in my top 10. That's why they're not in my top 10, rather. Quentin Johnston, first round wide receiver for the Chargers. You know, we got to give this guy a break. Yes, he's not the most polished route runner, but his role should grow. Mike Williams is out for the year. And we typically see rookies more involved in the game plan after their bye week, which the Chargers are currently on a bye week. Tyjae Spears and Kendre Miller are both really good handcuffs, exciting players out of college, are one injury away from being must starts every week in their offenses. All right, I'm going to get to my top 10 here, and then we'll talk about some honorable mentions. My number one stash right now, and this is specifically for ESPN leagues, that is Rashee Rice, wide receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs, available in almost 90% of leagues in ESPN, 50% of sleeper leagues. We'll get to you sleeper guys here in a second because maybe Rice is already rostered in your sleeper leagues. But so far in 2023, Rashee Rice, it's not been incredible. That's why these guys are called stashes. You know, there's not going to be any top 12 guys at any position here. But Rashee Rice, wide receiver, 57 on the year. And here's why he could be an exciting fantasy player soon. His targets, he's averaging 4.8 targets per game. His fantasy points, he's averaging 8.2 PPR points per game. You might say, okay, why the hell are you excited about this guy? Well, those numbers are more impressive when you consider that he's only playing about 37% of the snaps so far this year. We know that rookie players who produce are given more and more opportunities as the year goes on. You know, guys like Justin Jefferson, guys like Garrett Wilson last year, you know, I can think of names like Puka Nacua this year. Those guys are the exception, right? They're not the rule. Typically, rookies, it takes a little while for them to get into their groove into the NFL. So let me ask you, if he's currently averaging 37% of the snaps in this explosive offense, what happens if he becomes a 50, 60, 70% snap player? What happens if he gets up to 6 targets per game instead of 4.8? He could be potentially a weekly flex option with upside to be a wide receiver too. And look at that matchup in week 5 there. I highlighted it because this is the best matchup for wide receivers in fantasy football. The Vikings give up more points to the position than any other defense. I would not be surprised if this is the week that we see a huge breakout from Rashee Rice. All right, the second stash I'm going to bring to you guys today is Wan'Dale Robinson. He's available in a high percentage of all platforms, 98% of ESPN leagues, 87% of sleeper leagues. Wan'Dale is potentially the only exciting name to look out for in this Giants receiving core. Okay, for fantasy at least, right? He's finally recovered from his injury last year, and they are slowly working him into the offense. Yeah, he only got 9.7 PPR points last week. However, he saw 6 targets on just 64% of the snaps. In PPR formats, if he ramps up, we could see him be a legitimate flex option. Maybe not a guy in a standard league that you're excited about, but in PPR formats, we could see him catch 5, 6, 7 balls a game. For example, last year, before Wan'Dale went down with his injury, remember this is a second round pick last year, before he went down with that season ending injury, he was finally unleashed by this team in week 11 versus Detroit. In week 11, he was targeted 13 times, caught 9 of those targets for 100 yards, almost 20 PPR points. This is a player, in my opinion, in any 12-man league, he should be stashed as his role grows in that New York offense. And the good thing is they can scheme up, short little plays for him while this offensive line is kind of trying to band-aid itself together. All right, the third stash that I'm excited about is a tight end. If you need a tight end, this guy should be rostered in every format. I don't care if it's an 8-man, a 10-man, a 12-man, a 14. It doesn't matter, okay? Luke Musgrave should be rostered everywhere. He's available in 66% of ESPN leagues and 62% of sleeper leagues. He's the tight end 25 on the year. Now, he would have better looking numbers if he wasn't concussed last week, but keep in mind, he did leave week 4's Thursday night football matchup with a concussion, but in the first 3 weeks, he averaged 7.8 PPR points per game and was averaging 83% of the snaps. He was a tight end 10 in the first 3 weeks in that time span. That is super impressive. I mean, we do not expect rookies to dominate or contribute to fantasy teams out of the gate, but with how, this tight end rookie class looks great, but with how, desperate we are at tight end right now in fantasy, this guy should not be available anywhere. I would consider him a top 10 to 12 tight end rest of year. All right, the fourth stash that I am excited about right now is Chuba Hubbard, available in 82% of ESPN leagues and 67% of sleeper leagues. He's the RB36 on the year. You can see he's actually quite involved through the air with this offense. This offense is funneling a lot of its targets through the running back position. In fact, they're on track to probably, I believe, target running backs the most of any team in the NFL. Now, a lot of that would have to do with their lack of solidified wide receivers and a rookie quarterback in Bryce Young, who is just seeing pressure a lot. But there's no way around this really in Carolina. Chuba Hubbard is outplaying Miles Sanders. And this is coming from a guy who liked Miles Sanders this offseason. Miles Sanders dealing with a groin injury, the same injury that kept him out of preseason, right? And it's coming back. We know groin injuries, they just linger until you give them a bunch of time in the offseason. But Chuba was a better running back last week in week 4. He outsnapped Miles 38-32. He ran more routes than Miles. Miles ended the day with 2 more touches. However, on those touches, Chuba was the far more efficient guy. Miles at 1.5 yards per attempt, just 32 total yards, and Chuba hovering around 3 yards per attempt. Neither of them were superstars, but on the year as a whole, Chuba has been more efficient in general. Look at the first 3 games of the season. In the first 3 games, Miles was averaging 3.4 yards per attempt, while Chuba was at 6.5. That's an impressive number. And if you look at yards per touch, which includes receptions, Miles is at 3.9 yards per touch, while Chuba was at 5.9. Now, again, it shouldn't be that surprising. I talked about this guy on our waiver wire video. It shouldn't be surprising that a reliever is more efficient than the starter. That should be the case, right? They're given different defensive assignments. They're game planned around differently. And typically, when the backup is in, the defense isn't focusing on him. But regardless, I believe Chuba should be rostered because he could continually play himself into a better role. And with the groin injury that Miles Sanders is dealing with, who knows if that becomes a serious thing for him. All right. The 5th stash for me, and I hope you guys are enjoying this video. If you are, go ahead and smash the like button. I think this is just a great video for you to get ahead of your league mates. I really do. The 5th stash I'm going to talk about today is Tank Bigsby, available in 85% of ESPN leagues and 64% of sleeper leagues. This one isn't very hard. This is a handcuff, okay? Now, I was team Travis Etienne this offseason. On Twitter, there was this big divide. People saying Tank was going to take the job. People like me who were just extremely impressed with Travis Etienne's first year, the production that he put up, just the eye test as well. People like me saying, I don't see how Etienne's going to be replaced. So let's be clear about what this take is. This is if Etienne goes down, Tank Bigsby's a top 24 back rest of season. Okay? That's what the take is. The take is not expect Tank to develop a role and take over Travis Etienne's, spot, because I don't see that happening. Etienne is a very talented player, and I think people are realizing that. However, again, a handcuff where if an injury were to happen, instead of just hoping that you have the right amount of fab or the right priority to get this guy off the waiver wire that week, you already have him sitting on your team ready to go. Okay, the 6th stash I'm going to talk about is another tight end. How about Greg Dulcich, available in 90% of ESPN leagues and 81% of sleeper leagues. So he played in the first game, then got injured. But if you look at last year, he had a pretty impressive rookie season. You can see the stats on your screen. 55 targets, over 400 yards and 2 touchdowns. And if you look at weeks 6 to 16 in 2022, that's when Greg Dulcich really started to shine for this team. In that time span, he was averaging 3.3 receptions on 5.5 targets, over 41 yards, and 8.6 PPR points per game. From week 6 to 16, which is when he was healthy, last year, he was a top 10 tight end, okay? So we're talking about a guy that's uber talented. We've heard Sean say good things about him. He's going to be joining eventually a team that is struggling to have competent receiving options on their team. I think Greg Dulcich could open up something for Russell Wilson as he did last year. All right, the seventh stash we'll talk about is a wide receiver. That is Jonathan Mingo of the Carolina Panthers. He's available across all platforms, 90% available in ESPN, 75% available in Sleeper. So far on the year, he's a wide receiver 99. It's not been impressive at all, but there are three things that really give me hope here, okay? The first thing that we'll talk about that gives me hope is that when he's healthy, he's been on the field for a high percentage of snaps. Look at weeks 1 and 2, 87 and 98% of the snaps. Already from day one, we don't expect that from rookies. From day one, he was a full-time player for this team, and he's averaging 6.3 targets per game through 3 weeks. This team needs a wide receiver to step up. Why not Jonathan Mingo? They spent a second-round pick on him. If they can't trade for a wide receiver like we know they want to, maybe Mingo is given more and more opportunities and more targets. I mean, that last game before he got concussion in week 3 versus Seattle, he had 6 targets and he played 33% of the snaps. I mean, this could be someone who gets 6 to 7 to 8 to 9 targets per game as he kind of grows with this offense. All right, the 8th stash that we'll talk about is Josh Downs, wide receiver for the Colts, available in 87% of ESPN leagues and 70% of Sleeper leagues. He's a wide receiver 55 on the year. You can kind of see it from his stats. He's being targeted quite often, but his yards per target is for the most part quite low. He's not someone that's so far stretching the ball down the field. He's more of like this close towards the line of scrimmage guy for this team right now. Remember, Reggie Wayne, when they drafted Josh Downs, said he's the best wide receiver in the 2023 class. Did I believe him at the time? Absolutely not. Do I believe him now? No, absolutely not. I mean, if that was true, Reggie, how are you letting the guy fall to the 3rd round of the NFL draft? Come on, right? Obviously, it's lip service, but they like the kid, okay? And there's reasons to like the kid. Now, in week 3, his biggest game so far this year, the unfortunate part of looking at that game is that he was playing with Gardner Minshew, not with Anthony Richardson. So he hasn't really had a big game with Anthony Richardson so far. However, like we talked about with Rashee Rice, it's a good matchup this week for a breakout. Week 5, the Titans currently allow the 8th most points to fantasy wide receivers. Why can't Josh Downs, like in this matchup versus this secondary, do something that at least piques our interest to the point where people are starting to pick him up off waiver wires next week? Okay, the 9th stash that I have for you guys, I'm kind of digging into my bag with this one. And I don't think anyone's telling you to pick this player up, but in deeper formats, right? In an 8-man, of course, you don't pick this player up. But in deeper formats, I think this is a smart move, okay? Go ahead and pick up Zach Evans, available in 99% of ESPN leagues and 95% of Sleeper leagues. Hasn't played a snap so far, has been a healthy inactive. I really liked him coming out of TCU and Ole Miss. But for as good as Kyren Williams has been this year, we just have to remember that Sean McVay has been pretty unpredictable with his running backs and the way that he deploys them over the years, okay? I mean, Kyren is a superstar this year, and I love him. I'm not at all claiming that he won't continue to do what he's doing. But last year, Kyren was barely involved at all. And I know he struggled with a couple injuries, but man, come on. I mean, we got games where he's playing 9%, 6% of snaps, 27% of snaps, barely getting opportunities. Neither of these players, Kyren Williams or Zach Evans, were given high draft capital. Okay, neither were given heavy commitment from this team. Kyren was a 5th-round pick. Zach Evans was a 6th-round pick. Again, there's no reason to panic if you own Kyren Williams. None whatsoever. However, in deeper leagues, there is a chance that a talented running back like Zach Evans just needs some time to gain trust with his head coach until his head coach deploys him out there. I promise you he's a more talented running back than what we see right now with Ronnie Rivers. So give it some time, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a late bloomer. You know, weeks 9, weeks 10, weeks 11, if an injury were to happen, or if Kyren's not living up to expectations and he's not efficient, they give Zach Evans a chance. It would not surprise me. He's a talented player. All right, my 10th stash that we'll talk about is Elijah Mitchell. This one is pretty obvious. Available in 65% of ESPN leagues and 52% of sleeper leagues. In 2021, a lot of people don't remember this, but Mitchell was the RB1 for this team. He averaged over 12 PPR points. On a per game basis, he was the RB13 in scoring in 2021. Then in 2022, we all know the team goes out and trades for superstar Christian McCaffrey. The rest is history, adios. But if CMC were to go down with a serious injury, Mitchell would become an instant top 24 guy. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about handcuffs today, but let's be honest, that is how you get ahead of your league. The people who rostered Jerome Ford are ahead of their league, right? The people who had Kyren already on the roster are ahead of their leagues because they were thinking ahead of what could happen, what possibilities are in front of us. But if you look at Elijah Mitchell's splits with and without CMC, you can see how good he's been. Okay, so 6 games with CMC, Elijah's played, and 12 games out of split with no CMC. You can see without CMC averaging over 14 points per game, almost 18 rushing attempts, and 83 plus rushing yards. So again, in that offense, Elijah Mitchell is a must start if we see CMC suffer an injury, which is not something that we haven't seen before. And to end the video, I'm going to give you guys 5 honorable mentions. If you're in very, very, very deep leagues, we'll talk about these guys. So first one, Jalen Hyatt. Not really excited about him. Struggle to see him ever. Like not a player I loved coming out of college. Seemed like a limited deep threat player. But things change, right? I mean, keep in mind, Amon-Ra St. Brown, if you had only looked at Amon-Ra's stats in his rookie year to the first 8 weeks, you would have thought that guy's a bust. Just nothing for fantasy. But things change, and you have to be aware of that. Demario Douglas, Pop Douglas, as we like to call him, I think he's the most talented wide receiver in New England, and I think he's going to get more opportunities. Kadarius Toney, not playing a high percentage of snaps of the team just yet. Maybe he's still recovering from an injury. Sean Tucker, Chase Brown are both handcuffs for their teams. So guys, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hey, if you want insight on getting an edge on your league, we have so many incredible articles over on the Flock Fantasy website, including my weekly rankings, over 300 players ranked. It's a simple way for you to support what we do, support us, and get some incredible perks in return. Use our promo code LAND. You'll get 30% off and you'll unlock a bunch of perks that puts you ahead of your league mates. That's it. Drop a like. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll see you very soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, L-A-N-D, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.
It's so easy. Even your grandma could scan that QR code right there.